Alrighty, I think we will kick off, and if we have a couple of others join us, then that's fine. I know that May has given her apologies. Our session will be recorded as well today for all of the community. So welcome everyone to the Activity Centre's Strategy Online Information Session. This morning, we are going to hear from both Mitch and also from Jessie, one of our community engagement officers. I'd just like to let everyone know that this session will be recorded. And I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Whadjuk Noongar people whose lands we meet on today. I acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. And now I'll hand over to Jessie, who will give us a little rundown of what we're going to cover today.
Lovely, thank you, Nick. So just a quick overview for us. We're starting with just an icebreaker activity. So if you haven't had the chance yet, either on your computer or on your phone, if you could log on to the site menti.com, as you'll see across the top of your screen there, menti.com. Follow the prompts and enter that code 904639. This just allows us to sort of garner some feedback from you as we go along. And you can also follow the presentation through this software as well. And then we'll go through some house rules. I'll hand over to Mitchell, who will be doing our presentation today. It's an opportunity for question and answer, and also going through some more Menti polls at the end. So if everyone could log on to Menti and just let me know how you're feeling today to make sure that we've all got a handle on the software. How's everyone feeling on this Tuesday morning? Awesome, that's a great way to start the day.
Stuart says he's good, thanks.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Moving along, it looks like we've got a bit of a handle. Caffeinated, wonderful. I'm still going on the caffeine. Some house rules throughout the presentation. If you could keep your microphones muted, that just stops any distortion from running through the presentation. If you have any questions throughout, you can either utilize the raise hand function, which you'll see on the bottom of your menu bar along the screen, or also the chat function. And then we have some team members monitoring both the raise hand and the chat function, so you won't get skipped over. Having said that, I'll hand over to Mitchell Brooks, our Senior Strategic Planner for the City of Kalamunda, who will present to you today on the Activity Centre strategy.
Thanks, Jessie. Thank you everyone for taking some time out of your day to listen to this presentation. I hope you get something out of it. We certainly welcome as much feedback as possible to help us finalise this strategy and take it back to Council. As Jessie's mentioned, I'm Mitchell Brooks. I'm a Senior Strategic Planner at the City of Kalamunda, and I've had significant involvement in the preparation of this strategy. So what does this strategy actually mean to you? To start with, there's no immediate statutory effect, so we're not changing any zoning, any land uses or anything like that. There will be required for further investigations, community engagement and detailed planning to take these actions within the strategy into fruition. The city has no control over the instigation of development. So essentially what that means is all our activity centres, commercial land are within private land holdings. So it'd be up to the private landowner to actually instigate and undertake development. The city, however, is responsible for the assessment and determination of commercial developments. In some instances, it is the state government that will determine development applications, but the city always has a role in the assessment of such developments. The city puts in zonings, land permissibility and provisions in place to control what the actual development outcomes are. Where the city has significant control over, or all the control is in the public realm, so your roads and your verges. This can mostly be improved through things like landscaping, improving accessibility to commercial land holdings and also improving the safety around those commercial land holdings. So the activity centre strategy within the City of Kalamunda's planning framework sits within a local planning strategy, so it's a sub-strategy. The local planning strategy is something that we'll be preparing over the next 12 to 24 months, and all our sub-strategies will feed into that. So far we've had the public open space strategy approved in 2018, the industrial strategy approved 2018, and our environmental land use planning strategy approved in 2019. We recently advertised a draft housing strategy that was advertised over the last couple of months and I believe concluded in May. So we'll be finalising that over the next few months based on the feedback we got from the community. Obviously, we're advertising the activity centre strategy, seeking feedback on that, and then we'll finalise it and take to council later in the year for adoption. And we've also got the rules strategy, which is pending some inputs from the Pickering Brook Task Force, which is a state-led task force initiative. So the vision of the strategy is the City of Kalamunda will have a network of commercial activity centres that are characterised by their diversity, flexibility and unique character. And the objectives of the strategy are to respond to the change and growth of population, to ensure an equitable spatial distribution of facilities that communities are not geographically disadvantaged from activity centres, to improve the aesthetics of activity centre environments, and to reflect best practice land use planning and provide a robust framework for local commercial and activity centres. So the strategy as a whole all needs to fit within the objectives and the vision. So within the strategy, we have established an activity centre hierarchy, which each of our centres sits under. This hierarchy is established through State Planning Policy 4.2. So I'll start from the bottom where we have our smaller centres, the convenience centres. So this is typically just your standalone local deli or corner store. Then you go up to your local centres, which are quite a small scale shopping centre, often acted by a small grocery such as an IGA. Then you've got your neighbourhood centres, which are a much larger scale centre with a larger neighbourhood catchment, typically maybe a 400 to 800 metre walkable catchment. And they're often anchored by a larger grocery store such as a Woolies or a Coles, and will have a number of specialties within it. And then within the City of Kalamunda, our largest size centre is a district centre. This will often have a number of grocery stores, specialty stores, restaurants, and even offices as well, and serves a much larger catchment beyond just the suburb that it's within. Also, there are, within the hierarchy under the state planning policy, there are regional centres, but the city has no regional centres. Ones that you'd be familiar with are the likes of Midland, Cannington and Burragoon. So this slide just demonstrates where our centres sit within that hierarchy. So starting with the district centres, I'm sure you'd be familiar with Kalamunda and Forestfield. And then in the future, there's a possibility that Forestfield North might develop into a district size centre. Ones you'd be familiar with in the neighbourhood centre side of things, the likes of Sanderson Road in Lesmurdy, and also the one in High Wycombe along Kalamunda Road. And then locally, there's the likes of Gooseberry Hill, which has the likes of Embers and a few other smaller little stores. And then also on Lesmurdy Road near St Bridget's, where it has an IGA and then a couple of small specialties. And then a convenience store you might be familiar with is the Wollaston Deli. So there are a number of key statistics, particularly demographic and economic statistics, that influence the future of the planning of our activity centres. So these things include such as the increase in population over the next 16 years, which is predicted to increase by around 16,000. We've got a total workforce of around 14,000 people in the City of Kalamunda in 2016. Obviously, this might have changed in the last few years, but probably not significantly. Between 2011 and 2016, we had a total employment increase of 10%. And then in 2016, we had more than 27,000 residents of the city were working in Kalamunda. The city also has a relatively low employment rate compared to Western Australia. These are stats from 2016. In the June quarter of 2016, the unemployment rate was 4.2%. Probably the most key stat I want to focus on is the 25% of the resident workforce works in Kalamunda LGA, followed by Perth inner areas. So what this means is of people of working age in the city of Kalamunda, 25% of them not only live in the city of Kalamunda, but they also work within the city of Kalamunda. And there are the obvious benefits to this. There's reduced travel miles. There's a possibility for people to walk to work and also cycle or use public transport. But another important thing is it means that people are spending, not when they're working, they're also spending their time in the city of Kalamunda, so potentially also at lunch breaks and maybe after work, spending their money in the city of Kalamunda at the activity centres, rather than if they're working in the city, say for instance, they're spending their money in the city during their lunch breaks or getting their groceries in the city after work. So this is quite important in the future to continue to increase the viability of our activity centres. So to maintain this employment self-sufficiency, the city will require about 4,500 to 4,800 new jobs by 2036. And it would be good to see even more of this to increase that employment self-sufficiency. There are a number of key considerations that influence our activity centres and have influenced the preparation of this strategy. So the first one, an obvious one, is demographics. So the two key ones that really influence the city of Kalamunda is the rising population, so needing to be able to cater for this increased population over time through having the appropriate commercial space to cater for these people. And the other major one is aged care. Centres with an increased age population over the next 20 years, centres really need to be easily accessible for aged care, but we also need to look at providing new aged care centres in close proximity to our commercial land. Next one is consumer behaviour, and this one's really probably continues to evolve rapidly over the last 10, 20 years, particularly online shopping, which has continued to grow, reducing our reliance on centres to get our goods and services, which meant centres have had to be a bit more adaptable and become more about providing a welcoming experience and not just there for people to buy their goods and services. The next one, innovation and technology. The most obvious one within this space is digital content. I remember growing up in Kalamunda when I was a kid, there used to be 3 video stores. You used to have Civic, Video Easy and Blockbuster, and I used to love on Tuesdays, Mum would take us to Civic for the $2 special. Unfortunately, that's no longer the case, and we now rely on the likes of Netflix, Disney and Stan. So that's, that's commercial land that's no longer being uptaken by a business and now has to be replaced by something else. The other major influence or consideration to our centres is major infrastructure projects. So state government's obviously releasing a lot of new train stations, so there's activity that occurs around there. There's greater access throughout the Perth metropolitan region with more road upgrades that are occurring, so it's a lot easier for people to travel around to get to activity centres. People are happy to drive to Midland or Carousel to get their goods and services rather than just stay up in Kalamunda. So it's a really big impact on centres in that respect. There's the continued expansion of Perth Airport, particularly in the commercial space as well. We've seen the likes of the the commercial developments that occurred there, which really impact, particularly lights for High Wycombe, which are in close proximity to Perth Airport. And then there's also new developments such as Forestfield North, which will see new population catchments occur, which need activity centres to rely on. Lastly, I'll only just briefly touch on this, and that's COVID-19. Obviously very recent, this activity centre strategy was prepared just before it hit. So we'll have to undertake further analysis on what the impacts on that may be on our activity centres and put that into our final strategy. Excuse me. So we undertook some retail modelling to really determine what sort of potential future growth our existing centres may see over the next 16 years, and also the viability of new centres within the City of Kalamunda. The model takes into consideration factors such as population changes and also impacts from surrounding centres. So starting off with our new centres, I want to highlight that for these centres that are listed there, there will need to be further detailed planning, community engagement and detailed investigations to really determine the viability of these centres and the community support for these centres occurring. And also I'd like to highlight that development would have to be instigated through the actual private commercial landowners. So it's not the City of Kalamunda that would be instigating the development, we'd just be the assessing authority. So I'll go through each of these and just touch on each of them. So Forestfield North is obviously getting established through the structure planning process in the transit-oriented development precinct near the train station. That's something that is occurring at the moment through that structure planning process, and likely start to see some commercial development over the short to medium term. Watergrove South, really want to stress that this one is really subject to the concept planning, community engagement that's occurring at the moment, and also further detailed investigations to determine whether, for one, it's viable, and two, whether there's actually community support for a commercial centre occurring. Maida Vale South, this is an urban expansion area under the state planning framework. So planning investigations and detailed planning can occur in this area, and should it occur, there is that possibility for a centre to be achieved in that area to support any future development within that area. Maida Vale Road, a bit different to the other one, there is actually an approved development application on that site for a small centre, about 1,500 square metres in net lettable retail space. I believe from memory that includes an IGA, a tavern and a couple of small specialties. On the corner of Midland Road and Kalamunda Road, you may be familiar with the site near the golf course. That site currently isn't zoned appropriately for an activity centre, but the landowners have put in a Metropolitan Regional Scheme amendment for the site to allow for that to be rezoned to allow for a commercial centre. There's currently no decision on that. This site would be subject to a retail sustainability assessment to really ensure that it doesn't impact on the viability of centres occurring, particularly at Forestfield North, and also ensure there ain't any too much impacts on our existing centres as well. The Hills Rural Area, I touched on the task force previously. So there's a Pickering Brook task force which is run by the state government, and they're undertaking investigations to determine the viability of a centre within that Hills Rural Area. So whether that's an entirely new centre established within that area, or whether it's an expansion of the existing small local cafe that's there, more commercial space. That's something that will have to be determined through those task force investigations. And then going on to our existing centres, so Kalamunda and Forestfield, the two district centres there, we're expecting between 2,000 to 4,000 potential additional net lettable area in Kalamunda over the next 16 years. And in Forestfield, around about 4,000 square metres additional that might be viable within that time frame, noting that these are subject to private developments actually occurring to allow for that additional space. But what the retail modelling is saying is with increased populations and maybe greater connectivity within the area, these increases in floor space may be viable by that time, and also in the new centres, those floor spaces that are listed in that table might be viable by 2036. So within the strategy, we prepared a number of opportunities and issues maps for a number of our centres. These opportunities and issues have been identified by the city that may assist increase activity and viability and the general aesthetics of within these centres. So it mainly looks at the public realm, as the city has control of the public realm, so through road improvements, verge landscaping, safety and accessibility improvements. Noting again that the centres themselves, the private realm, these improvements really have to be developed by the landowners themselves, instigated through that process. These ops and issues maps simply identify where there may be opportunities for private landowners undertaking some improvements that go hand in hand with the public realm improvements. Also important to again state that further consultation and detailed planning would be required to undertake these changes and take them to fruition. And I also want to note that I had some of the centres within the activity centre strategy we haven't prepared opportunities and issues maps for, but we really encourage feedback on those other centres that we haven't done them for. During the finalisation of the strategy, we may prepare more depending on the feedback we get. And we've also haven't prepared these ops and issues maps for Kalamunda and Forestfield district centres. That's because we've looked at those through the preparation of district activity centre plans. So, for instance, Kalamunda recently went through a substantial activity centre plan process. So I'll just touch on a couple of the key elements from each of these ops and issues maps. So the first one, Edinburgh Road, that's sitting in front of you at the moment down in Forestfield. So we see that there's opportunities for public open space improvements. Across the road, there's Lincoln Road Reserve there, so improved public realm improvements on that site might generate greater activity across the road from the centre. And there's also opportunities for improved road improvements through landscaping and pavement treatments and the like. So this centre is located on Berkshire Road in Forestfield. The only real thing we've really identified for this site is there's a plot of land next door which is a reserve, but it's basically just a vacant plot of dirt. There's no real use of the site, no functionality, isn't that great aesthetically either for the centre. So we've identified the opportunity whether there's the possibility to expand the site, the existing activity centre through improved commercial space, or is depending on what kind of feedback we get, maybe the best way for that site to improve is through residential development. So increasing the population in close proximity to the existing commercial land. The next one is wedged between Bellway and Kalamunda Road. You may be familiar with this one, right near the Kalamunda Road and Roe Highway interchange. So the main thing we've identified for this centre is looking at accessibility improvement opportunities, given the impacts that are currently occurring with the Roe Highway, Kalamunda Road interchange upgrades, and that accessibility side of things is really impacted through those through that work at the moment. So this one in High Wycombe along Kalamunda Road, Neighbourhood Activity Centre. Some of the main things we've identified there is the upgrade of Elmore Way Reserve, which is just to the rear of the site. So we've got approved cash in lieu funds to improve that site for a dog park. So we'd like that hopefully will generate greater activity in close proximity to the activity centre and hopefully create greater activity for the centre as well. And we've also identified Kalamunda Road upgrade improvements, which that's a project that's currently underway at the moment, looking at what sort of visual improvements through landscaping can occur to improve that environment through there and also improve the access and safety along Kalamunda Road as well for that activity centre. The other major activity centre within High Wycombe is on Whitnoom Road, quite close to the Fratway rail yard and also in close proximity to the future Forestfield North development. So with its close proximity to the airport, it's impacted by an airport noise contour, which prevents increased residential development potential of the area. So in terms of its residential catchment, there's no real possibility to improve that. There's possibility impacts from Forestfield North occurring as well. So we really see the best opportunities to improve this centre through improved public realm opportunities. So improving the road network, potential landscaping and pavement treatments and the like. Kalamunda Glades along Canning Road. So this one, the only thing we've really identified for this one is potential sewer expansion around that site, which could potentially increase development around that area and the population catchment of the centre. I want to stress that this would really be subject to community engagement and detailed investigations to really determine the viability of that occurring, and also, most importantly, whether there's actually community support for that occurring. So this one's Sanderson Road Shopping Centre in Lesbirdie. The main improvements we've identified for this site are the opportunities to improve the interface with the centre through the road and landscaping improvements along Sanderson Road in particular, and also potential public open space improvements at the adjacent, which are basically bushland sites at the moment. I believe this is the last one, which is Wattle Grove along Howell Road. So over the next 12 months, we're expecting Woodla Pine Brook improvements to the rear of the centre, which will really improve that the visual interface with the centre, and hopefully greater accessibility for those people who are walking to the centre. Also creates great amenity and activity around the centre. And there's also planned improvements to Howell Road as well to improve the visual environment of Howell Road and the accessibility to the centre. Also, I'd like to touch on the adjacent sites to the existing centre. There's currently a structure plan amendment proposal in place to expand the commercial land to that adjacent existing centre, which may allow for additional business activity within that Cell 9 Wattle Grove area. And just lastly on those, like I said, I'd like to touch, we obviously haven't covered all 28 of our activity centres, so feel free to provide feedback on other centres if you'd like to see ops and issues maps prepared for those. So I'll now finish off with the key strategies and actions of this strategy. So the main one is looking at potential and future activity centres within the City of Kalamunda to cater for future populations in particular, and also our existing populations where there isn't much commercial activity occurring. So I've touched on all of these before, but I'll just go over them again. So Maida Vale, this one, they've obviously got an existing population there, but little commercial activity happening at the moment. Most people who live in Maida Vale have to go up to either Kalamunda or High Wycombe to access their retail needs and service needs. So we've identified that Midland Road site as a potential site, and there's also that approved DA development application on Maida Vale Road, and then Maida Vale South being the potential future urban development area and catering for that through a centre there. Forestfield North, obviously we're doing the structure planning for that area at the moment, and the increased population in that area will likely require some sort of commercial development within that space. Wattle Grove South, as I've touched on before, this is really subject to community engagement and concept planning outcomes to determine its viability and the community support for such a centre occurring in that area. And then, as I've touched on previously as well, the Hills Rural Centre being subject to task force recommendations. Yep. And then lastly, our other key strategies and actions that we've recommended through the strategy. Firstly, the consideration of the preparation of public realm improvement plans. This really correlates and links to those ops and issues maps that we went through previously. So actually I'd go into the next step in preparing plans to identify what those more specific public realm improvements would be. Investigating the need for a car parking strategy. So with a greater population means that we may see greater pressures on the parking within our existing centres. So particularly our larger ones like Forestfield and Kalamunda and High Wycombe. So we'll need to investigate whether there's a need for a car parking strategy to really look at how we alleviate such pressures. Third one being the review of the permissibility and provisions under our current planning scheme and implementing those into a new planning scheme, number 4, which we'll be developing over the next couple of years. So that might mean greater flexibility under our scheme within commercial land or additional uses, or it might mean the flip side, depending on feedback we get. Does that mean we look at greater control on development outcomes? And the last one is the review of our district activity centre plans. So Kalamunda, that was adopted in March 2020. Over the last couple of years, we've been preparing that plan, and that really identifies a number of improvements through the Kalamunda activity centre areas, such as Haynes Street, Central Mall and the like. That will likely be developed over the short to medium term. And then there's Forestfield, which we'll be preparing in the coming years, and then we'll be reviewing those around every 5 years to ensure that all our planning for those centres is relevant and up to date. So that pretty much wraps up my presentation so far. Thank you for listening in, and yeah, welcome as much feedback as possible to help us finalise the strategy. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much for that, Mitch. Lots of information there to observe, and we would like to try and unpack that a little bit by asking some feedback and some questions of you, our audience members. So using the Menti program, if you could just help us with these questions here. What aspects of the activity centre strategy do you like? And if you just type your answers into the box provided on your Menti screen, they will pop up on the screen here, so we'll be able to address those as they come through. Or you could always raise your hand or use the chat function. Maybe I could leave you thinking on that one for now, and I will move along. And just to reiterate, and sorry to repeat myself, but if you go along to the menti.com website and you use the code that you see across the top of the screen here, 904639, that will bring, wonderful, that will bring this information up on your phones or your computer, and you can help us along with the feedback as we go.
So we've just had some feedback from Mr. Costero, who said the council seems to be moving in the right direction for the constituents.
Wonderful, thank you, Nick. And what do you think are the greatest challenges facing the City of Kalamunda and our activity centres at the moment? So for example, online shopping, digital content, as Mitch was referring to with Civic and his $2 Tuesday specials, bit of a changing landscape, obviously a huge one being COVID-19 and the recovery that we're setting about. I'll give you just a moment to pull your answers together.
So I've just popped up a response there from Mr. Costero, who wanted to raise being able to maintain the visual appearance of the activity centres.
Wonderful, thank you again. What do you think is most important for this strategy to focus on? What would you list as the key focuses?
Will, I'd be interested to hear your view, given your current role in one of the district centres.
Yeah, sure. On this particular question, so what do we think is most important?
Yeah, along with any other general comments you might have, they're welcome.
Yeah, sure. So I suppose one comment just from the previous slide, which I put in, was just around, I think landscaping and verge site improvements would be really welcomed around the Forestfield area. I think there's a lot that can be done, especially along Hale Road, to kind of, improve the aesthetics around there. In terms of what do I think is the most important issue for the strategy to focus on, I guess for us, it's really about population density at the end of the day, making sure that we've got, really great opportunities for housing growth and livability for the local area, so that we're seeing those communities growing and increasing in size. And that's from a commercial perspective, in that we've got our retailers and shops that need those communities to survive. So yeah, I think issues to focus on is population density and a really good livability piece for those activity centres.
Wonderful, thank you for that feedback. So this next question will refer to this list of the activity centre hierarchy map. We couldn't get the whole question on one slide, I apologise. So if you just keep these centres in mind as you're thinking about this question, which activity centres should be the top priority for public realm improvements?
I can also see that we've just had Martin join the meeting. Martin, I'm not sure if you've got your mic on. If not, I've just jumped on the chat and left you a comment as well. We're happy to have a bit of a Q&A at the end of the session if you've got any questions.
Wonderful, thank you. And did anyone have any suggestions for which centre or centres they feel should be top priority? Lovely, I'll move it along. What general improvements would you like to see in the city's activity centres? And I don't actually have any sort of examples or suggestions there. So Mitch, I might throw to you if I can. Do you have any examples of sort of what we might include as general improvements?
So it's probably mostly your public realm improvements. You might look at pavement treatments for roads, landscaping for verges, accessibility improvements to centres, and also safety as well. They're probably the main things that you might consider.
Perfect, thank you, Mitch. Wonderful. I will continue to move it along. And I guess a general one for you, not specifically about the strategy, but this entire process, how has it made you feel sort of from cradle to grave in regards to being notified of the process that we're going through, accessing the strategy, digesting it, reading through it, and then attending this meeting? This really helps us in the community engagement team to ensure that we are using best practices. So we would appreciate your feedback if possible. Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. And now I can just open the floor. If anybody has any questions, you can either use the Menti program and they will appear on the screen here, or we do otherwise have, as we've mentioned, the hand raising or the chat function. Does anyone have anything else that they'd like to add to this session?
Martin, I know you've just jumped on and you had another webinar. Was there anything specifically that you were looking to have covered off that you'd like to ask the team? Because we're happy to check back in. And for you, Stu and Will and our other guests, if you want to leave a comment in the chat or just let us know. And I would just stress to Also, please complete that online survey if you haven't already, and encourage the other business owners that you're in contact with to do the same.
Sorry, Nicole, could you just confirm which survey was that? Is that the one on the Engage website?
Yeah,
It is indeed. I'll bring that up for you now. So it's the engage.kalamunda website, and you'll see a tile there for activity centre strategy.
Ah, yeah, cool.
The more submissions, the better. So if we can really encourage, you know, whether it's leaseholders, shop owners, all of that, the general community. So we're obviously promoting quite heavily, and we'll do a social media reminder as well today for the public. You know, we hear a lot about what people want to see in activity centres, and particularly how much they appreciate some of the beautification works that have been done at some of the centres. So it'd be really great to confirm or reevaluate, you know, where the thinking is in relation to these locations.
Yeah, I'm happy to circulate that to our retailers. If you're able to tag Hawaiian's Forestfield in that Facebook post, I can reshare that across our channels as well.
Awesome, Jess. If you could make sure that we do that, please.
Wonderful. I'm making a note right now.
And Mr. Costera has just said that he thought it was very good and he has thanked us. So thank you so much, Stu, because I know that you've got a really long history as a business owner in the Kalamunda Town Centre, and certainly a very iconic family. I don't think there's many places that you go that people don't know of the Costeras. So thanks so much for taking part today. We really appreciate it.
Wonderful, thank you. And if we don't have any further questions, understand that.
Sorry, Jess, we've just got another one. So Martin Stanley, I don't know if you're related to John Martin, but that's another pretty iconic Perth name. Martin has just said he's interested mainly in environmental and housing, and just wanted to hear what was being spoken about. So just so that you are aware, Martin, we have recorded the entire session. So that'll actually go up on that Engage page, and you can view the entire presentation. And there's a lot of background documents on there as well. So I'll drop that into the chat for you too. And it'll give you a lot of really good information. We've done some great infographics to explain the strategy in a nice, easy way. And we do encourage you to have your say.
Wonderful. And were there any further questions or comments at this stage? If not, we can conclude the meeting there. Understand that we're standing between yourselves and morning tea, and we don't want to hold you up. And just wanted to reiterate what Nicole said. Thank you very much for giving up your time today to attend this online session. We really do appreciate your feedback. And if you haven't had the opportunity yet, please do jump onto our Engage page and complete that survey. Wonderful, everyone. Thank you very much.